Previously, I made a video on the RCTA community, and in that video I said if somebody would step forward for an interview, I would take it, and we're in luck. Someone did. As always, please don't hate on them. They are no longer a part of this nonsense, and they were very sweet and so friendly to work with. So without further ado, let's get into this.
Hello everyone, my name is Dustin, aka 𝘪𝘮𝘰𝘳𝘵𝘢, and I am a former RCTA person / member of the community. I'm here having a interview with Julius, and it has been such a great time so far.
I'm very happy that you reached out, because I did have a lot of questions, because the more that I looked into it, the more I actually saw on TikTok and the more that I saw on Instagram, and I was like, what in the fuck is this? And so I was like, let's make a video on it and see. The first question that I'd really like to ask is, what was the thought process on how you got into it? Like, what was the ideology to why you'd want to be a different race?
So it was kind of a dark beginning for me, and I feel like it's also probably a dark beginning for a lot of the kids that you see on TikTok. And it's a bit of a topic to talk about in general because, like I said, it's a dark beginning. But the initial thing that got me into it was just having a very sort of broken household. I lived in a not great area, kind of like downtown. I was in the middle of like the inner city section, so I was in a very low income area with a lot of, I would say, not great things happening. I don't want to say anything that could get you demonetized.
No,
but the very first time I had ever been introduced to the concept of Asian culture was my military dad returning home from a deployment to Japan. And when I was a lot younger, instead of me saying, oh, I want to be Japanese, it was more of like, oh, I'm obsessed with Japanese culture. So, you know, anime, Asian cuisine, learning Japanese language, all of that was sort of the stepping stone into it. But it wasn't until I would say about 2017 or 2018 when I discovered what back then was called the ethnicity change community on YouTube. And what got me into the idea of being a different ethnicity was primarily just not fitting in at school, not really having any sort of positivity at home, and feeling very lost in who I was. And for some reason, the way that it was always worded in the descriptions of the videos on YouTube, which, mind you, it's all like subliminal videos, which kind of goes to show that subliminals are not like a new thing. They've been around since, I would say, at least 2015. But I can remember the way that it was always worded was very positive. It was like, you know, oh, some of the affirmations would be about people accepting you more as your new desired ethnicity and just making more friends and being surrounded by positivity. And to someone who was in a very dark place, that was kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel almost, where it was like, oh, this is my people, this is my community. If I change who I am, I'll be more loved. And mind you, I was very young at the time, so I didn't have a concept of what was socially acceptable versus what wasn't. And this was also in an area where your ethnicity kind of played into how you were treated. So me being white in a predominantly people of color area, not just Black, but also, you know, Asian, Native, Indian, all other ethnicities were around me. It was a predominantly person of color area, and I was one of the few white kids. And so in a weird sense of way, I was kind of outcasted due to my ethnicity. So in my head, I thought, if I'm a different ethnicity, maybe I'll be more acceptable. And that kind of led into just straight up like lying my head off, saying, oh, I'm Korean, I'm Japanese, I'm Chinese, I'm mixed. And it kind of led into me being even more outcasted, obviously, because people could tell that I wasn't what I was saying I was. And it led to a lot of bullying, and I do not suggest it at all.
That takes me kind of like, did you ever tell people outside of this clique about this? Like, did you ever tell family or friends while you were a part of that kind of community?
I never told my family because I knew that they would ostracize me for it, but I definitely told other people who was in my close friend group. I told them about my insecurities within my ethnicity, and I told them, like, hey, I found a community on the internet that kind of feels the same way about this situation with their own lives, and they've said, you know, how they coped with it was choosing to be a different ethnicity, which obviously now in hindsight is not physically possible. But my friend's response was to shut me out and to ostracize me, which is kind of expected. But to someone who was struggling already, to have that happen just led me down even further. And I definitely left middle school and led into ninth grade, high school with a very interesting reputation. Not a good one, though.
Of course, when you're 14, you think the world just revolves around you, and like, well, you know, if I can do this, why can't somebody else do it, kind of thing.
I was gonna say, it's definitely, you're right when you say that when you're younger, you don't have the concept of having the conversation, because where I was at, especially, any kind of conversation regarding mental health or mental, illness was ostracized already, both from parents and from teachers. We would get in trouble for talking about it. So when someone like me ran around and was like, oh, I feel insecure due to my appearance and my ethnicity, I'm gonna lie about my ethnicity now. It just, instead of having the typical response of, are you okay? It was, you're weird, you deserve to be ostracized. And it definitely has a different sort of impact from when you're a kid versus when you're an adult, for sure.
I guess my next kind of question stems for like, how long were you saying that you were a different ethnicity?
That's a good question. I really can't recall how long it was for, because it was a big portion of my life. It took up a lot of my life, really, if that makes any sense. Like, I'm only 19, about to be 20, but in terms of how long I've been alive, that sort of phase of me being what we now call RCTA was a pretty big chunk of it. I would say from about maybe like 11 or 12 all the way to about 17, and kind of switching between, oh, I'm Japanese to, oh, I'm Korean, because those were the two that were most accessible to me, both due to having been exposed to anime and also, K-dramas. I think my first introduction to Korean culture in general was literally "Do" by Blackpink, which is a crazy way to get into K-pop, first of all, because that's like a bombshell of a song. That's like one of their biggest bops from that era. But also, for that to be my introduction into Korean culture was kind of almost backwards, because in my mind I thought, oh, Koreans are so cool now, like they're so hip-hop, and that's obviously not necessarily a true statement because it's a generalization,
Right.
but that was, I think, I can't remember when Do came out. I believe it was 2018, maybe 2017, and so I would have been around 14 or 15, so that's probably one of the bigger, I guess, stepping stones within that phase of my life where I went from lying about being Japanese to lying about being Korean. Very weird.
Yeah, I think it's very odd. I'm not gonna lie. I've been very interested. You go on Reddit and you see this like long paragraph that people are talking about. And I absolutely understand where these people are coming from, because from an outsider's perspective, looking into somebody who's done that, you're thinking, what in the fuck are you doing? Like, and a lot of times, you see bait accounts that do it, and a part of me always kind of wonders if they're actually a part of it, simply because they know the ins and outs. So, if you're doing these subliminal things and stuff like that, are you really a part of it? And you just saying that you have a bait account so it doesn't make you look as weird?
I wouldn't be able to answer that kind of question because I'm not currently part of the community anymore. So when people do make the bait accounts, it's kind of, that's not really something that I necessarily condone, because you're just adding on to the fire, if that makes any sense. Especially if you're like someone who infiltrates like their Discord servers, the more people that go into those Discord servers, the more attention you're putting on the topic, and the more sort of popularity you're giving to this sort of phenomenon. I remember when I was people who make bait accounts and like they infiltrate the Discord servers, especially, that is like a very big way of bringing more attention, not only to the topic, but also to the people who are in like sort of creating these servers and trying to invite other kids into the server. And I'm saying kids because I don't think any of these people are adults. I think it's mostly just like younger teens and preteens that are doing this. TikTok is very accessible to anyone, and it's not hard to lie about your age nowadays at all.
Not the slightest, because I was thinking the same thing. From what I partially gathered, it was anyone from like the age of like 12 to 17 at the highest. It's like they kind of regain their sensibility around like their late 17-ish area to 18, and then they're like, well, I shouldn't do this. It's very rare that you see somebody who's our age and it's like, yeah, I'm actually still Korean, and they'll be like fully white kind of thing.
Yes. I think it's definitely interesting to see, because I can remember, like, as soon as I turned 17 is when I started, like, kind of taking a step back and looking at my life and being like, why did I think this was a good idea? You know, obviously people can tell that I'm white. Why would I lie about it? And this is also, I ended up, you know, dropping out of high school and getting my GED, which, you know, we're happy that I have my diploma. At the same time, it was me starting college that kind of jump-started my reevaluation, I guess, of my own person. And it's interesting to see how many people on YouTube back then, you would see them comment, like, go back to the old videos they watched, and they would comment like, hey, this is me from, you know, 2 years later. I'm no longer thinking like this, and you also shouldn't think like this. There was a lot of people who would come to their senses, and then they would go back to like the comment sections or the Instagram groups or whatever, and they'd be like, y'all, this is madness, this is mental illness, y'all need to get help. I got help. I realized how wrong it was. You should too. Props to them, for sure. Props to them for being able to come to their senses. Hoping that a lot of these kids aren't allowing people in their real life to see this, because if they are, that's just going to lead to so much bullying. And I did see where some kids were literally telling their parents, like, hey, I identify as Korean. Please don't do that. Oh my god, please don't do that. You're gonna get yourself thrown into a mental hospital.
I saw that a lot too. It actually came up in like a question that I had, because I saw so many of these people telling their real life friends and family that they were this other ethnicity, and their reaction to this is like, there's no way that you're believing that, because it's nonsense. You're telling the person that you came out of that you're a completely different race, and they're thinking, what the hell's wrong with you?
What's wrong with my kid? I feel like a big part of it as well is sort of the over-fetishization of East Asian culture, because obviously most of these kids are going to go straight for, oh, I'm Korean, I'm Japanese, I'm Chinese. So I think a lot of the reason that people tend to gravitate towards the East Asian culture is because it's over-fetishized in America, and with the popularization of both Korean pop and Japanese pop, it kind of pushes this narrative that being East Asian is like trendy or cool. And obviously if you look at like American media right now, especially like the incident where Ariana Grande like was called out for Asian fishing, you know, the phrase Asian fishing is now becoming part of the mainstream media, and because a lot of celebrities are like getting rid of their BBLs and getting rid of their black scent and stuff, I feel like it's kind of, now it's in mainstream American media, so it's kind of more popular to be interested in this kind of topic. And for RCTA to be predominantly on TikTok and Discord is already dangerous enough, but for subliminals to still exist on YouTube and for people to still make these kind of subliminals is also technically bad, because it's just kind of like a consistent cycle of cultural appropriation. It started with, you know, Armenian culture and just like, you know, East European culture, and then it went into Black culture, and now it's going into East Asian culture, and who knows where it's going to be next.
Yeah.
And it's just a ruthless cycle, I feel like, because obviously back in like the earlier 2000s, it was trendy to be super thin, and just, you know, eating disorders were rampant.
Yeah.
Especially on like Tumblr, 4chan, Reddit, all of it. And as a good example of just how quickly children can be influenced, social media didn't really exist back then. You had MySpace, and that was about it. And this is coming from someone who was alive back then, but I was like 4. So my older brothers were the ones who I looked to see how they acted. And the influence of the internet, regardless if you have social media or not, is so powerful that all it takes is one celebrity donning something for that one thing to be super popular. So, like eating disorders were so popularized and romanticized back in the early 2000s, and now cultural appropriation is becoming such a normalized thing now that I feel like a lot of these kids don't even realize anymore how wrong it is. Like they don't ever have the concept of how wrong it is. Because when I first started off doing this craziness, I knew. Let me put my lipstick down. Sorry, I knew it was wrong, and that was kind of what fed into me wanting to do it. Because I was like, oh, this is so wrong, but that must mean that it's cool. Not at all.
And I would 100% agree that nowadays, especially like cultural appropriation is a big issue, especially because K-pop is so popular right now and so many people have their eyes on it that they think, well, since it's popular, then I should look like that, is how I feel like some people may perceive this. I could be completely wrong, but because when I originally got into like Japanese and Korean culture, I was in middle school and I would watch anime so much, and I never wanted to be a different race than what I am. I'm proud to be mixed, and that's just how it is for me. But I know that other people, like you said, have come from specific areas in their life where they don't feel accepted. But to see other people doing it and to be like, this is okay, children are gonna think, this is okay. So then when they do it and they tell their parents, of course their parents are gonna be like, what the hell are you doing? And it's gonna back trail to like TikTok and Discord and YouTube, where they have these subliminal videos where they think that they're becoming more of a different race, but in reality they're just being fed lies.
For sure. I think a lot of it, and I will go ahead and put out there, I do believe in the concept of subliminals. I do believe that subliminals can work because really you're just kind of feeding your own brain certain affirmations, and if you believe it is true, basically that's been a thing for hundreds of years now. But for those ethnicity subliminals to exist, first of all, it's biologically and physically impossible to change your ethnicity. Your body, the way your body has been built, your DNA, there's no way to change that, at least not in today's modern society with our modern medicine. That's not possible.
A prime example is Ollie London.
I hate Ollie London.
Me too.
But it really, those kinds of subliminals really are so pointless, and you're kind of like feeding your brain too much information, so you overwhelm yourself and you kind of drive yourself back into the mindset of not feeling good enough and not fitting in. Speaking of Ollie London, he is a good example of what I like to call it, not mentally being there, not mentally understanding your surroundings and basically just not being able to read the room. So obviously Ollie London is originally a white man from England. And first of all, I will be the first person to say England is not necessarily just a cesspool of like whiteness. England has a lot of really rich and genuine history, and I can vouch for that because my family is predominantly Irish and Scottish. So, which is technically part of Europe, but close enough to England to where the influence is still seen in my family's homeland, as you could say. So Ollie London is a good example of someone taking extreme measures to try and get that sort of sense of belonging that they never had in life. Because I think when Ollie London was on like Dr. Phil or some other like show, he was talking about how he had a rough childhood. He didn't fit in. He was bullied. He was an emo kid for a while, which is crazy to think that someone could go from emo to a race baiter. But when he first got into K-pop, I think that is probably where most of the RCTA community starts with like K-pop or J-pop or anime. And what he did, where he got these expensive surgeries and just completely changed his appearance and then made it public that he was, changing his ethnicity, that is a sign of genuine troubledness. And someone like that probably is either addicted to negative attention or is just so deep in their self-hatred that they can't be pulled out of it. And those are the kind of people that cannot be saved, in my opinion, which is a very brutal thing to say, but mind you, Ollie London is like almost in his 30s. I think he is in his 30s,
Yeah.
and he also now has his own K-pop group, which was 𝘠𝘵, and please go out of your way to employ other people into your madness that's far from saving. I don't think someone like him can be saved, and I think a big concern that people from the outside see when they look into the RCTA community, I think a lot of people think, I hope these kids come to their senses, because if they don't, they'll end up being the next Ollie London or the next, 𝘠𝘵 member, which is terrifying to think of when you remember just how influential social media is. And I feel like there's people that have existed that are like him, that you can see sort of like their descent into madness, but we've never seen it in such a mainstream, accessible, viewable font before now. Because used to, a lot of like the OG emo and scene kids of like MySpace, they would have their descent into madness because at that time, drug usage was pretty popular.
Hmm.
And this is something that I'll probably keep jumping back to because this is so similar to what's happening right now with RCTA, where emo kids and the OG scene kids and stuff on MySpace, they would kind of document their descent into madness. And it was different then because social media wasn't as big of a thing, but it was very scarily similar to what happened with Ollie London, where the people would switch from, oh, I'm emo, to, oh, I'm racist, oh, I'm transphobic, or I'm homophobic, around getting whatever that title they could find that would produce the most shock, because in their head, attention is attention regardless if it's positive or negative. And that is something very sad to see within someone who has a bright future. If Ollie never did any of this craziness, he could have been, doing great things now. He could have been a historical museum curator, I think is what he wanted to be at one point. I think he said something like that. He said, I remember he mentioned on like Dr. Phil being into fashion. If he'd never done this, he could have been well into the fashion scene, because it's hard to get in there. You just have to not be weird, if that makes sense.
Not be a problematic figure.
For sure.
A lot of people, Ollie London is a video in itself because he genuinely is just a fucking concept of a person. And you can see that maybe not everybody who's a part of this strange community hates themselves, but a part of you still is not proud to be who you really are.
Being embarrassing on social media is so common now. Everyone tries to avoid it. They're terrified of being seen as cringe, but there's no way of really truly avoiding it. But there is ways of lessening the cringe. I don't go on TikTok and talk about, oh, I'm a white girl in a black household, I'm gonna make this my entire personality. No, because I know better. Because I know that's not something that would be viewed as normal. Most of my content is literally just makeup videos at this point, because I know one of those is more acceptable than the other. To go onto TikTok and make a whole spiel about, oh, well, I'm struggling, so I'm going to change my ethnicity, you're adding to your own troubles, pretty much. And I think definitely something that I had dealt with was sort of I would watch Korean YouTubers who are in the beauty community. I would watch them and I would watch how they did their makeup, and then I would do it on my own self, and I'd be like, well, it doesn't look right, so I'm the problem. And I feel like a good example of this is when you have hooded eyes, it's really hard to do eyeliner, because if you do it the way that everyone else does it, it's going to come down, it's going to be curved, and it's going to kind of point downward. So I had to adapt my makeup style to my eye shape. So literally all of my eyeliner has a little notch so that it'll go above the fold of my line and kind of be visible. Before, I didn't know that. So I thought that I just thought that my eyes were supposed to look like a Korean person's eyes. And obviously that's not the case. But when you were younger, you don't really understand that you have to find something fit for yourself. I think a lot of people, they just don't grasp the concept of differences within ethnicities and facial structures. I feel like, I can't say this for certain, but I feel like a lot of kids especially are under the impression that there is a one specific standard to look like you're supposed to look like this, and if you don't, you're the problem, which isn't a new concept, but it's definitely a much more prominent one nowadays, especially on TikTok, with like the 𝘤𝘢𝘳𝘵𝘢𝘯𝘵 and the 𝘤𝘢𝘳𝘵 and the the K-beauty styles that you see.
Right.
It's kind of scary almost to see just how many people seem to be under the impression that, oh, if it doesn't look good on me, then I'm the problem.
100% agree with that, because as a child you are very impressionable, you're very naive, and you don't, you're not going to have the mindset an adult would have. So you're going to take it for face value, and you're going to be like, well, this does not look right, so surely something is wrong with me. Because a lot of insecure people have that tendency to be like, and especially when you're so young, a lot of times you go through phases where people are going to call you names that they shouldn't, or they're going to be aggressive. And middle school and high school is just a cesspool of people in general, so you kind of just have to deal with that. And because you have so many people who are mean and who are dealing with other things in their life, and you come together, a lot of times that insecurity forms, and so then you have to see it as like oh well, this has to mean something is wrong with me. And that brings me to, what would you say about this that is the hardest, like the trickiest slope to like a decline into it?
I would probably say, like you mentioned, where you're like in middle school and high school, where it's a cesspool of different people with different problems and kind of lashing out on each other. The sort of the lack of community you feel when you're younger can especially, that is the nosedive right there. Not feeling like you have people to look to or people who care about you. And when, like, if you're on social media and if you're in like a group of people who have similar interests to you, and you see, oh, well, on YouTube, people are super nice to me, but in real life, people are mean to me. So I must stick with this community. If clearly they care more about me. So especially with like the RCTA community, I've noticed that they're very kind to each other. And when you find a community that you think is good for you, you latch onto it, and that nosedives you straight into the mindset of, I need to change. I need to be something else. I'm the problem. I need to fix it. That's what happened with me too. With like, I discovered it on YouTube, and that kind of nosedived me into being obsessed with K-pop and wanting to be like a K-pop, idol. And a big part of it was seeing people supposedly get actual results from it. And I think a lot of the results was just them editing their pictures and wearing makeup and, losing weight, which was a pretty scary thing to think about. But when you see people supposedly getting results, especially when you're a kid and you're vulnerable, you take it at face value, and it's such a dark descent into self-hatred. And I'm smiling now, but to think about it, it's scary to think of just how quickly it happened, because you don't realize it's happening until it's too late, really. Notice it, but you won't until you're too far gone into it, and it's going to take either you maturing or you being bullied out of it for you to change, which is sad to say, but I feel like it's true. You kind of, something has to change for you to realize that what you're doing is wrong, and that your self-hatred is not going to change whether you look different or not.
I guess my final question is, what are your thoughts on this now?
I will definitely say, okay, so if the way I'm gonna word it, if I could talk to 13-year-old Dustin and look her in the eyes and just have a conversation with her, I would say a couple of things. And the first one would be, you changing your ethnicity will not change your surrounding, environment. You changing what you think you are is not going to make other people change their actions. You can't control other people. And also, your ethnicity is not the pinnacle of who you are. For example, I'm a white girl. I'm visibly white. I don't let that hold me back from feeling good about myself. And I can understand if you are like another white person and you kind of are embarrassed to be white because of kind of how the white people in general are oftentimes seen. Because I mean, there's no denying that white people can be some of the most racist and vile people, but so can other ethnicities. It's understandable to be a little embarrassed of being a white person, just like it's embarrassing to be American. We acknowledge that. Don't allow the embarrassment of your ethnicity to drag you to the point of self-hatred, because that's, one, not something you can control, and two, that's something that is not your concern. Because if you know you're not a bad person, then you're not a bad person. If you know you aren't racist, then you're not racist. You know, if you know that you're not what the stereotype says about white people, then you know you're not that stereotype, and therefore it really shouldn't be an offensive thing. And I know that's kind of hard to say. It's like hard to grasp the concept of like, well, if it's not true, then it shouldn't bother me. Because people can say I'm fat and that's gonna bother me. Even to this day, I won't lie. If someone calls me fat, I'm gonna be thinking about it for the next week. But remind yourself that other people's opinions of you are not immediately the truth. And I would definitely warn not to take things at face value, because when you do, you only lead yourself further down into a darker sort of place. And the final thing I would say would be, do not, under any circumstances, assume that just because someone is, you know, making subliminals and is hosting a Discord server and is talking about this topic, do not assume that they have the best of intentions for you, because just because they say, oh, I'm your friend, you can talk to me, that's not always the case. Because there's a lot of people who will make like bait accounts and they'll pretend to be RCTA, and what they're doing is attempting to make a smear campaign against people who are going through this. And I've, not to be like a fearmonger or anything, but like on Twitter, there's cases where people have doxed RCTA people before. So I would be very careful, especially on TikTok and Discord. I'd be insanely careful with who you genuinely trust, because at this point, we don't know who's faking it and who's genuinely an RCTA person. And regardless if they're not a real RCTA or they are, you shouldn't allow yourself to fall into the constant idea that everyone is your friend, because that's not the case. Regardless of like how nice they are, any predator can mimic its prey and get into the prey's mind. And the same thing can apply to people who are running these kinds of accounts. Please, for the love of all that is holy, be careful on the internet, because that's something that should have been ingrained into everyone's brain from a very early age. But the internet will never go away, even if it's banned in America. No, the influence of it is still there. So please do not trust everything you see. Do not believe everything you see. Don't be friends with everyone, because not everyone is a good person.
Well guys, that was the interview. I had a good time. They were very lovely. I hope you guys have learned something from this interview. I may do more in the future, I'm not sure yet. But with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye. Angel boy, don't say that. Never gonna stand a chance. Heartbreak like a sad romance. Said that you'd never come back again. Been 3 days, now you're back again.